Hi, welcome back. I'm James. Well, in our last episode, I spent quite some time describing how the computer stores the information that we give it about the lines we draw, how it stores it sort of in its memory. What we didn't do was spend any time really talking about how to draw lines. So in this episode, we'll draw some lines. I'll show you some different techniques and ways of doing that within CAD. And then we'll talk a little bit about how that information I gave you in the last video is useful. And then when we've done that, we'll create our first parts for the Bodiam Station project. So, whereas in our last video I spent quite a bit of time looking at theory, today we're going to keep it pretty practical. In fact, 10 minutes from now I'll have shown you probably 90% of the tools that you're going to use most of the time creating architectural drawings or drawings for your model making and what have you. I'm going to use for today the same software that I showed you last time, the software that I use in school when I'm teaching children. And the reason being is it's got a very simple interface and it's quite easy to follow along. In a couple of episodes' time, we'll have a look at some software that you can freely download, and I'll show you exactly the same tools and where you can find them in that software so that you'll be able to follow along from home without purchasing any complicated software. So let's make a start. So here we are, we're on our basic drawing screen. And the first tool we're going to have a look at, and it's a fairly obvious one, is the line tool. Now on this piece of software we access the line tool by clicking this icon in the top left hand corner of the screen, which looks unsurprisingly like a line. Now when I first show this to my students at school, the very first thing they'll do is they'll take this line tool and they'll just draw random things on the screen, something like this. And you could probably hear from my mouse clicks that to start a line I left click, move my mouse where I want the line to go, and I left click to drop the line into place. Now that works fine. We can draw lines anywhere we want on the screen. We can even draw lines off the edge of our piece of paper if we want. However, we've got no reference to where we've actually drawn our lines. So let's imagine, let's keep this architectural. I want to draw a house. I can draw a house something like this. Most of us would recognise this as a building, and certainly by the time I've put a door in and maybe a chimney stack, and perhaps even a window, you get the idea. Now I've deliberately drawn this a little bit crooked just to make a point, but let's finish this second window off and zoom in and have a look at this house that I've just drawn. So here we go. Most of us would recognise it as a house, but it's not accurate. None of our lines that we would want to be horizontal actually are. All of them are, the horizontals are all wonky, so are the verticals, and it's all off centre and it's a bit of a mess. And if we look closely, these corners don't even match. So whilst we've drawn something on the screen that may look like we want it to look like, there's no geometrical accuracy to any of this. So it's not really the correct way to go about doing things, just randomly drawing on screen. In fact, I would say if we're randomly drawing on screen, then what we're doing is completely wrong. So if drawing random lines is completely wrong, how could we do something that's maybe a little bit more correct? Well, I'm going to begin by forgetting how to use the software for a start. Now here we go. So we'll begin by deleting all of those lines and getting centered back up on the page again. Now all software, all CAD software, regardless of which you use, will have an ability to switch on and off a grid. So if I switch the grid on here and we zoom in, we'll see we've got a grid of dots. Now, I'm going to use the measuring tool and just to check this grid, and we'll see that the grid is on a pitch of 10 millimeters. Now that's quite useful to know, because it means we can now start to draw things with an accuracy of 10 millimeters really quite straightforwardly. Now, for the benefit of those well, let's begin by trying to draw a line. So I'm going to draw a box, a 20 millimeter square box. So what I can do is hover over those gridded dots and try and trace out a 20 by 20 grid. Now I'm doing this quickly, I've got the pressure of a camera here, but even so, there we go, we've got a box done. Now if I zoom in, we can see that in actual fact that grid hasn't really helped us very much. These lines they're not horizontal nor are they vertical, and they don't quite sit on the dots, so that hasn't worked too well. However, whichever piece of CAD software you use, there will be an ability to lock the cursor to the grid. Now on this software I have a button in the top right hand corner called Grid Lock. So if I turn the grid lock on and now select my line tool again, we'll see that the cursor kind of magnetically sticks to those points. Now you can't see that on your screen because you don't have the benefit of operating the mouse and sort of experiencing the same hand-eye coordination that I am, but rest assured that this mouse cursor is now sticking to the dots. So I can now draw lines that are perfectly horizontal, perfectly vertical, that stick to the grid. So we get our square done. Now what we've achieved there is our first drawing with an element of perfect accuracy. Those lines are all interconnected. That is to say that the corners are accurate. This line here, for example, this horizontal line and this vertical line both meet at a point exactly, and we've got ourselves a nice square. So you might be thinking, hang on a minute, James, you said this was going to get easier and this seems just as complicated as last time. And well, maybe it is, but it is going to become easier. I'm going to show you one more skill, and then we're going to look at a very practical way that we can kind of almost forget about everything we've just looked at and draw using some much simpler techniques. However, everything I've shown you will be useful later on, so the things you've learnt won't be wasted. So we've drawn randomly on screen and we found that was no good, and we've also drawn using the grid as a guide to help us. I'm going to show you a third way of drawing now, and for this we're going to copy this box that I've got on my screen here. So this is a 50 by 50 millimeter box. Now the units are irrelevant, this could be inches, this could be miles, it could be kilometers, could be whatever. It's 50 units by 50 units. So what I'm going to do is choose my line tool once again, and I'll start here just to the right hand side of the box I've already drawn. So I'll give a left click to start the line, and what I could do, as I've shown you before, is bring my mouse to where I want the line to finish and left click again. But in this case I'm going to enter the value for this horizontal line, or the end point of this horizontal line, using coordinates relative to the start point. So I've started my start point here. Now in the top left hand corner of my screen are two unlabelled boxes, and this represents where we'll enter the coordinates for the end point of our line. So in this box I'm going to put the x coordinate, so it is relative 50 millimeters along on the x-axis from where I started, and on the y-axis it will be 0. So if I click OK, it will draw that line in for me. So I can repeat that, but this time I'm going to come vertically up from here. So I'm going to left click to start my line, and I can come up here. Now in this case, because I'm going vertically upwards, we'll have an x value of 0, and a Y value of 50. Click OK, and we've got our line in. Now we'll continue around, and this time we'll draw in a horizontal line 50mm long, travelling left from where our last line ended. So I'll left click to start the line. Because we'll be going minus 50 in the x-axis, I'll enter into the box minus 50, and because we're going neither up nor down on the y-axis, it's a horizontal line, I'll put in 0 and click OK. And so to complete the box, I can left click where that line just finished and enter the coordinates to close the box. So in this case, we're going to have we're neither going left nor right, so it will be an x value of 0, but we're going to be going down on the y-axis by 50. So we'll type in negative or minus 50, click OK, and we've completed our box. Now I'm just going to grab the dimensioning tool, and we'll talk about the dimensioning tool more another time, but for now let's just use it here very quickly, and I'll show you that that box we've created is 50 by 50mm. It's exactly the same as the one we've got on the left hand side. So what we've done here is we've drawn using relative coordinates. That is to say, we've started a line and then we've entered the end point of the line by its relative coordinates to where we started. If that hasn't confused you, we could do exactly the same thing using absolute coordinates, which we spoke about in the last video. But I think that's enough mind-numbing for now. Let's take a practical example of something we can draw, and I'll show you how we can draw it very, very easily, forgetting about everything that I've just told you just for the minute. But as I keep saying, all of this will become useful in the fullness of time. So what you're learning here isn't wasted. So what I have on my screen here is the component parts for the Bodium station model that I've been speaking about. And what we'll do, just to kind of illustrate a basic point, is we'll pick on this area first. So this is one of the gable walls of the building. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to copy that into a new drawing so that we don't become distracted. And let's place it just here, and we'll zoom in a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is put some dimensions onto here so we can see just how big this thing is. So, and you can see we've got some rather peculiar measurements there, down to hundredths of a millimetre, and that's because this has been scaled down from real world measurements that I've taken. Okay, what I'm going to do here, and I don't really need to, but let's measure this here as well, and we'll do the same on this side. And the only reason I put those two measurements on is it shows us that the centre point of the ridge of the building is exactly where we would expect it to be, in that it's halfway across the width of this building. So I think we've got enough information there to get drawing. And it may well be that if we've been out and had a look at a building that we want to make a model of, we might have taken measurements like this. Now these measurements here are all in millimetres because this is a scale model. It doesn't matter what those measurements are. It could be feet, it could be inches, it could be millimetres, it could be metres, it doesn't matter. So if I was going to draw something like this, this is how I would do it typically. And this works for most architectural projects where, generally speaking, we're dealing with horizontal and vertical measurements. So the first thing I would tend to do is switch on my gridlock tool, and as I showed you previously, we could quickly draw in a horizontal and a vertical line. Now these lines don't need to be accurate at the moment, I've just thrown them down to give me some reference geometry. Now I'm going to show you a tool that I mentioned in the first episode in this series, and it's this one here. Now in this software they call it the contour tool, but very often it's referred to as offset. And what this is going to allow me to do is to offset the lines that I've previously drawn by a given amount. So if I demonstrate it, if I select the tool by default it's suggesting that I might like a contour spacing of 5mm. Well, I can change that. I'm going to change it to 65.92. Click OK. Now if I click just to the right hand side of this line, it will copy it across. So if I do that again, this time I'm going to put the height of the building in, which is 66.93, up from this baseline which I've drawn. And then if we look at the level of the eaves, it's 42.66. So we can do exactly the same thing, and we'll enter 42.66 as our contour spacing. And again, I'm going to click that just up from the bottom. So we've got all our basic geometry done. We used the line tool once to draw our initial vertical and our horizontal line in, and we've used this contour tool. What I'm going to do now is select a delete tool. So this is the third tool that we'll be using, and I can trim away the excess lines here that we really don't need, just to clean this up. And there we go, we've got ourselves a drawing. Now I can use that contour tool once again, 32.66, and this will give me the position of the ridge just here. So I can come back to my line tool, and by choosing the tool over here from the right hand menu, which is an attach tool, I can attach my diagonal lines against that geometry that I've already fixed. Now I can take my delete tool once again, remove all the information that I don't need, and I should be left with a drawing which is an exact facsimile of the one that I was copying. And just to prove the point, I'm going to put the measurements back in so we can see it's exactly the same. So building on from part 1 in this series, where in fact it was part 2 where I spoke about vectors, we haven't considered vectors at all. And if we look at those drawing processes I've shown you previously in this episode, we haven't looked at any of those either. I've literally drawn 2 lines, and I've used the offset tool, and I've entered values to for my contours or my offsets, and a delete tool. And that's how quick and easy CAD can be. Now if I wanted to make some changes to this drawing, some detailed changes, I can come back and redraw things. I could use that offset tool again. However, remembering what we know about vectors, we can do other bits and pieces. So for example, if I select this line here, now in this software a little box appears here that says property, and you'll find something similar in all CAD software. So if I click where it says property, and I'll just drag this box to one side, we can see it gives us the start point as X and Y coordinates, and we can see it gives us an end point for these coordinates. So I started the line up here and I finished down here. It tells us exactly how long that line is and what its angle is. So this is all the information we spoke about in the previous episode where we talked about vectors. And as our confidence grows, we can alter any of these we like. So for example, we might decide we want to extend the roof on this building down to create a bit of a canopy. So I could come in here where it says length, change the value to just pick 55 for argument's sake, and it's extended that line down. So let's remove these measurements because they're confusing things. So you can see what I've done there in understanding what I had learned previously about vectors. I'm able to change that line. In fact, I can change any one of these lines and manipulate them any way I like. Now, it may well be that for the majority of your use of CAD, you would never need to do this. However, once you have a good understanding of how you can modify the properties of a single line, it really can open up lots of other opportunities for modifying drawings in ways that maybe the toolbars and the menus that you've got available in your software, maybe it's not quite so simple to do. So there we go, there's our first piece for our podium station. That's the gable wall, and that's the measurements of it. Next time we'll look at drawing some more of the components for the building, and we'll see exactly how this model is going together. And hopefully I'll be able to show you how, with a bit of an understanding of the materials that we're going to be using to build it, we can design with the material properties in mind using CAD. So there you have it. We've taken our first few steps with some basic line work, and we've seen how we could delete lines that we no longer want. And we've also used some of that information from our last episode to look at how we can modify our lines when we've drawn them. I hope you found the bits with the model as well interesting. Anyway, the next video in the series will be coming up very soon, so stay tuned and thanks for watching. Bye bye.